Baby discovered mother bear. Had medical degree in previous life. What happened next was unbelievable. The morning mist hung low over the pine trees like a blanket that hadn't quite decided whether to stay or leave. Ethan Marshall pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders as he walked deeper into the forest, his boots making soft crunching sounds on the carpet of fallen needles. He had come here to escape, to find some peace after months of noise and chaos in the city. His cabin sat 3 miles behind him now, and with each step forward, the weight on his chest seemed to lift just a little bit more. The trees stood tall and silent around him, their branches creating a cathedral of green above his head. He breathed in the sharp scent of pine and damp earth, feeling something inside him finally start to unwind. Then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in these woods. It was soft at first, so faint he thought maybe he had imagined it, but there it was again, drifting through the trees like a lost melody. It was crying. A baby's cry, clear and unmistakable, coming from somewhere ahead of him. Ethan stopped walking and stood perfectly still, his heart suddenly beating faster in his chest. There shouldn't be anyone else out here. The nearest town was 15 miles away, and his was the only cabin for miles in any direction. He had chosen this spot specifically because it was so isolated, so removed from everything and everyone. Yet here was this sound, this impossible sound of an infant crying in the wilderness. He moved forward carefully now, following the sound through the trees. His mind raced with possibilities, each one more unlikely than the last. Maybe someone had gotten lost while hiking with their child. Maybe there had been an accident on the old logging road that ran through the far side of the forest. But none of these explanations felt right. The crying grew louder as he walked, leading him off the barely visible trail he had been following, and into a part of the forest he had never explored before. The trees grew thicker here, their trunks massive and ancient, and the light filtered through the canopy in thin, golden streams that made everything look like it was underwater. The crying stopped suddenly, and the silence that followed was somehow louder than the sound had been. Ethan found himself holding his breath, straining to hear something, anything, that would tell him he hadn't imagined the whole thing. Then he saw the clearing ahead, a perfect circle of grass surrounded by towering pines. The morning sun had found this spot, filling it with warm light that seemed almost magical after the dimness of the forest. And there, right in the center of the clearing, was something that made him stop so suddenly he almost fell forward. A baby lay on a bed of soft moss, wrapped in what looked like an old quilt. The infant couldn't have been more than a few months old, with wisps of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. But that wasn't what made Ethan's blood run cold. Standing over the baby, close enough to touch it with her massive paw, was a bear. Not just any bear, but a mother bear, the most dangerous creature you could encounter in these woods. She was enormous, her brown fur catching the sunlight in a way that made her look almost golden. Her head was lowered toward the baby, and for one terrifying moment, Ethan thought he was about to witness something horrible. But the bear wasn't attacking. She was just standing there, looking down at the infant with what Ethan could only describe as gentleness. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at the bear with wide, curious eyes, one tiny hand reaching up as if trying to touch the animal's nose. The bear didn't move, didn't growl, didn't do any of the things Ethan expected a wild animal to do when confronted with easy prey. She just stood there, watching over the child like a guardian made of fur and muscle and wild instinct. Ethan didn't know how long he stood at the edge of the clearing, frozen by equal parts fear and wonder. His rational mind screamed at him to run, to get as far away from this scene as possible before the bear noticed him. But something else, something deeper and older than logic, kept him rooted to the spot. There was something happening here that he didn't understand, something that went against everything he knew about the natural world. Bears didn't protect human babies. They didn't stand guard over them in sunny clearings like something out of a fairy tale. Yet here it was, happening right in front of him. The bear's head turned slowly, and her dark eyes found Ethan standing at the tree line. He felt his heart stop, waiting for the charge, for the roar that would signal his last moments on Earth. But the bear just looked at him, her gaze steady and somehow knowing. They stared at each other across the clearing, predator and man, and in that moment Ethan felt something pass between them. It wasn't communication exactly, but something more basic, more fundamental. An understanding, maybe, or a recognition of something neither of them could put into words, even if they had shared a language. The bear took a step back from the baby, then another, her movements slow and deliberate. She never took her eyes off Ethan, but there was no aggression in her posture, no sign that she saw him as a threat. She was backing away from the infant, creating space, almost as if she was inviting him forward. Ethan's legs felt like they were made of water, but somehow he managed to take a step into the clearing. Then another. The bear continued to retreat, maintaining the distance between them, until she reached the far edge of the circle of sunlight. The baby made a small sound. Not quite a cry, but something close to it, and both Ethan and the bear turned to look at the infant. The child's face was scrunching up, preparing for what would surely be a full-throated wail, and without thinking, Ethan moved forward quickly. He knelt beside the baby, his hands hovering over the small form, not quite sure what to do. He had never held a baby before, never even been around one for more than a few minutes at a time. But the infant was starting to cry now, and instinct took over. He gathered the child into his arms, quilt and all, and stood up slowly. The weight of the baby was almost nothing, but the responsibility of it felt enormous. The infant stopped crying almost immediately, settling against Ethan's chest with a small sigh. He could feel the tiny heartbeat against his own, quick and bird-like, and something inside him shifted. He looked up to find the bear still watching from the edge of the clearing. She hadn't run away as he expected. She was just standing there, massive and patient, like she was waiting for something. "I don't understand," Ethan heard himself say out loud, his voice cracking slightly. "What is this? What are you?" The bear, of course, didn't answer, but she did something that would stay with Ethan for the rest of his life. She lowered her great head in what looked almost like a nod, then turned and walked into the forest. She didn't hurry, didn't crash through the underbrush like bears usually did. She moved with a strange grace, and within moments she had vanished among the trees, leaving Ethan alone in the clearing with the baby. The infant made another small sound, and Ethan looked down at the tiny face. The baby's eyes were brown, almost the same color as the bear's had been, and they looked up at him with complete trust. No fear, no uncertainty, just the simple faith that comes with being too young to know that the world can be dangerous. Ethan felt something break inside him, some wall he had built around his heart after years of disappointment and loss. This child had been left here, abandoned or lost, and somehow a wild bear had been watching over it. None of it made sense, but sense seemed less important than the weight of the baby in his arms and the strange feeling that he had been meant to find this clearing, meant to take this child. He started walking back toward his cabin, moving carefully to avoid jostling the baby. His mind was racing with practical concerns now. He would need supplies, formula, diapers, all the things babies required that he didn't have. He would need to contact the authorities, report finding an abandoned child. But even as he thought these things, he knew he wouldn't do that last part. Not yet. There was something about the way the bear had looked at him, something about this whole impossible situation that told him this wasn't a matter for police or social services. At least, not right away. The walk back seemed shorter than the walk out had been, as if the forest itself was making the path easier for him now that he carried such precious cargo. The baby dozed against his chest, making small sleeping sounds that Ethan found oddly soothing. He had come to these woods to be alone, to escape from people and their complications. But now here he was, carrying a baby he had found in a clearing, watched over by a bear that had looked at him with almost human understanding. His life had just become infinitely more complicated, and yet he didn't feel the panic he expected. Instead, he felt something like purpose, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, even though he couldn't see the whole picture yet. His cabin appeared through the trees, small and sturdy, smoke still rising from the chimney where he had left a fire burning. It had seemed like enough when he had arrived here 6 months ago, running from a life that had fallen apart in ways he still didn't want to think about. But now, looking at it with the baby in his arms, it seemed impossibly small and unprepared for what was about to happen. He pushed open the door with his shoulder, careful not to wake the infant, and stepped inside. The warmth hit him immediately, and the baby stirred slightly but didn't wake. Ethan moved to the couch, sitting down carefully and adjusting the child in his arms. In the light of the cabin, he could see the baby more clearly. It was a girl, he realized, probably no more than 3 or 4 months old. Her cheeks were round and healthy-looking, showing no signs of exposure or neglect. The quilt she was wrapped in was old but clean, hand-stitched with a pattern of stars and moons that someone had put a lot of care into creating. There was something else, too, something he hadn't noticed in the clearing. Pinned to the quilt was a small piece of paper, folded several times and slightly damp from the morning dew. Ethan managed to unfold it with one hand while keeping the baby secure with the other. The writing was feminine and careful, but rushed, as if written in a hurry. It said simply, "Her name is Lily. Please keep her safe. The forest knows." Ethan read the note 3 times, trying to make sense of it. The forest knows. What did that mean? And who had left this child in a clearing in the middle of nowhere, trusting that someone would find her? Or had they known about the bear? Had they known the animal would watch over the baby until someone came? The questions multiplied in his mind, each one stranger than the last, but no answers came. All he had was a baby named Lily, a cryptic note, and the memory of a bear's knowing eyes. Lily began to fuss, her face scrunching up in what Ethan was starting to recognize as her pre-crying expression. She was probably hungry, he realized, and he had nothing to give her. The nearest store was in town, a 40-minute drive on good days, longer if the old logging road was muddy from recent rain. He would have to leave her here while he went for supplies, but that thought made his chest tighten with anxiety. What if something happened while he was gone? What if whoever had left her came back? What if the bear came to the cabin? That last thought should have frightened him, but strangely it didn't. The bear hadn't seemed dangerous, at least not to the baby. If anything, she had seemed protective, almost maternal in her watchfulness. But bears didn't behave that way. Ethan had lived in these woods for months now, and he had seen bears several times, always from a safe distance. They were wild animals, dangerous and unpredictable. They didn't stand guard over human babies like something out of a children's story. Yet he had seen it with his own eyes, had looked into that bear's face, and seen something that shouldn't exist in a wild animal. Lily's fussing was becoming more insistent now, and Ethan knew he had to make a decision. He could bundle her up and take her with him to town, but that would mean questions he wasn't ready to answer. Or he could leave her here for the short time it would take to drive to town and back, maybe 2 hours at most. Neither option felt right, but the baby needed food, and that was the most important thing right now. He stood up carefully and carried Lily to his bedroom, placing her in the center of his bed and building a wall of pillows around her so she couldn't roll off. She looked so small there, surrounded by his things, this tiny person who had appeared in his life like something out of a dream. He found himself talking to her as he prepared to leave, explaining where he was going and promising to be back soon, even though he knew she couldn't understand him. Her brown eyes followed his movements, and when he leaned down to adjust the quilt around her, one tiny hand grabbed his finger with surprising strength. "I'll be right back, Lily," he said, and was surprised to find he meant it completely. This child he had known for less than an hour had already wound herself around his heart in a way he hadn't expected. He gently freed his finger and backed toward the door, watching her the whole time. She didn't cry when he left, just watched him with those serious brown eyes until he closed the bedroom door. The drive to town was a blur of anxiety and planning. Ethan made mental lists of everything he would need, trying to remember what he had seen in stores when he had walked past the baby sections without paying attention. Formula, bottles, diapers, clothes, blankets. The list seemed endless, and his knowledge felt dangerously limited. He drove faster than was safe on the winding mountain road, his thoughts constantly returning to the cabin and the baby he had left there. The town was quiet when he arrived, the small grocery store nearly empty in the middle of a weekday afternoon. He grabbed a cart and headed straight for the baby aisle, feeling completely out of his depth. An older woman was stocking shelves nearby, and she looked at him with curiosity as he stood staring at the wall of formula options with obvious confusion on his face. "First time father?" she asked kindly, and Ethan found himself nodding before he could think better of it. "How old is the little one?" "About 3 months, I think," he said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. The woman smiled and reached for a can of formula, explaining about different types and age ranges with the patience of someone who had done this many times before. She helped him select everything he would need, chatting pleasantly about babies and their needs, never questioning why a man who lived alone in the mountains suddenly needed infant supplies. Ethan loaded everything into his truck, adding bags of his own groceries almost as an afterthought. The drive back seemed even longer than the drive out, every minute stretching as he imagined all the things that could go wrong. But when he finally pulled up to the cabin, everything was quiet. No cars in the driveway, no signs of disturbance. He grabbed the bags and hurried inside, his heart not slowing until he pushed open the bedroom door and saw Lily exactly where he had left her, awake but content, staring at the ceiling with fascination. The relief that flooded through him was unexpected in its intensity. He had known this child for only a few hours, but already the thought of something happening to her was unbearable. He set down the bags and picked her up, her weight already feeling familiar in his arms. She made a small sound of contentment, her head turning toward his chest, and he found himself smiling without meaning to. The rest of the afternoon was a crash course in baby care. Ethan read the instructions on the formula can 3 times before attempting to make a bottle, terrified of doing something wrong. But Lily was patient with his fumbling attempts, drinking the formula eagerly once he finally got it right. Changing a diaper proved to be more challenging than he had anticipated, but he managed it, talking to Lily the whole time to distract both of them from his incompetence. As the sun began to set, painting the sky outside in shades of orange and pink, Ethan sat on the couch with Lily in his arms, both of them fed and content for the moment. She was awake but quiet, her eyes moving around the room with interest, occasionally focusing on his face with an intensity that seemed unusual for such a young baby. He found himself telling her about the cabin, about the forest, about his life before he came here, even though he knew she couldn't understand any of it. "I don't know why you were in that clearing," he said softly, "or why that bear was watching over you. I don't know who left you, or why they thought the forest would keep you safe. But you're here now, and I'm going to take care of you. I don't know how to be a father. I never thought I would be one, but I'm going to figure it out. We'll figure it out together, okay?" Lily's response was to yawn widely, her tiny mouth forming a perfect O, and then her eyes began to drift closed. Ethan held her as she fell asleep, afraid to move and disturb her. The weight of her in his arms felt right somehow, like something that had been missing without him even knowing it. Outside, darkness was falling over the forest, and somewhere out there was a bear who had done something impossible. The rational part of his mind said he should report all of this, should hand Lily over to people who knew what they were doing. But the note had said to keep her safe, had said the forest knows, and somehow that felt like a responsibility he couldn't hand over to anyone else. As if in response to his thoughts, he heard something outside. Not a threatening sound, just a soft, huffing breath that he recognized from his months in the woods. He stood up carefully, Lily still sleeping in his arms, and moved to the window. There, at the edge of the porch light's reach, he could see a large shape. The bear was there, sitting at the tree line like a guardian, her eyes reflecting the light from the cabin. She wasn't trying to approach, wasn't doing anything threatening. She was just there, watching, waiting. Ethan stood at the window for a long time, holding the sleeping baby and looking out at the bear, who had somehow become part of this strange story. The animal didn't move, didn't leave, just sat there with a patience that seemed almost human. Finally, Ethan stepped back from the window and carried Lily to the bedroom. He had bought a small portable crib in town, and he set it up beside his bed, placing the sleeping infant inside with careful movements. When he returned to the living room window, the bear was gone. But somehow Ethan knew she hadn't gone far. She was out there in the darkness, watching over the cabin the same way she had watched over Lily in the clearing. It should have been frightening, having a wild bear so close to his home. But instead it felt like protection, like the forest itself had decided to guard this child and, by extension, him. That night, Ethan barely slept. Every sound from the crib had him instantly alert, checking to make sure Lily was still breathing, still okay. She woke twice for bottles, and he fed her in the darkness, whispering nonsense words that seemed to soothe them both. Between feedings, he lay awake thinking about the impossibility of his situation. He had come to these woods to be alone, to nurse his wounds and figure out what to do with a life that had gone off track. Instead, he had found a baby in a clearing, watched over by a bear, with only a cryptic note for explanation. As dawn broke through the windows, painting the room in soft gray light, Lily began to stir in her crib. Ethan picked her up before she could cry, already learning her signals, and carried her to the kitchen to prepare a bottle. Through the window, he could see the forest waking up, birds beginning their morning songs, mist rising from the ground like ghostly fingers. And there, just visible through the trees, was a flash of brown fur. The bear was still there, still watching. "She's not going to leave, is she?" Ethan said to Lily, who was focused entirely on her bottle. "She's going to stay out there and watch over you. Over us." The thought should have been disturbing, but instead it was oddly comforting. They weren't alone in this strange situation. They had a guardian, unusual as she was. The days began to fall into a rhythm after that. Ethan learned to care for Lily through trial and error, each small success feeling like a major victory. She was an easy baby, rarely crying, seeming content to observe the world around her with those serious brown eyes. And always the bear was there. Sometimes visible at the tree line, sometimes just a sense of presence in the forest, but always there. Ethan started leaving food out for her, fish when he caught extra, berries he gathered on his walks with Lily strapped to his chest in a carrier he had bought on another trip to town. The bear never approached when he was watching, but the food always disappeared, and sometimes he would find things left in return. A honeycomb once, perfectly intact and sweet. A collection of medicinal herbs that he recognized from a survival book he had read. Once, strangest of all, a small toy, handmade from wood and worn smooth with age, that looked like it had been carved to resemble a bear. He gave it to Lily, who grabbed it immediately and seemed to recognize it somehow, holding it close with her tiny hands. People in town started to notice his new situation, of course. The woman from the grocery store always asked after his daughter when he came in for supplies. Others whispered when they thought he wasn't listening, wondering about the sudden appearance of a baby in the hermit's life. But no one questioned him directly, perhaps sensing that this was not a story he was ready to tell. And really, what would he say? That he had found her in the woods, watched over by a bear, that the bear still guarded his cabin every night. They would think he had lost his mind, but Ethan knew he hadn't lost anything. If anything, he had found something, though he couldn't quite name what it was. Purpose, maybe. Connection. A reason to wake up each morning that went beyond simple survival. Lily was thriving under his care, growing stronger and more alert each day. Her smiles, when they came, lit up the entire cabin. Her laughter, which started as small giggles and grew into full belly laughs, was the best sound he had ever heard. The bear remained their constant companion, though she never came closer than the tree line. Sometimes, when Ethan took Lily out onto the porch in the evenings, he would see the animal more clearly. She would sit at the edge of the forest, calm and patient, and watch them with those intelligent eyes. Lily always seemed to know when the bear was there, turning her head to look even when the animal was hidden in shadow. There was a connection between them that Ethan couldn't explain, something that had started in that sunlit clearing and continued to grow stronger. One evening, about 3 weeks after finding Lily, Ethan was sitting on the porch with her when the bear did something new. Instead of staying at the tree line, she took a few steps forward, moving slowly and deliberately into the yard. Ethan tensed, his arms tightening around Lily, but the baby just cooed happily, reaching out her arms toward the approaching animal. The bear stopped about 20 feet away, still a safe distance but closer than she had ever been before. They sat there, the three of them, as the sun set behind the mountains. Man, baby, and bear, connected by something none of them fully understood. The bear's eyes moved from Lily to Ethan and back again, and in them he saw something that looked almost like approval, as if she had been testing him these past weeks, making sure he was worthy of the trust that had been placed in him, and somehow, impossibly, he had passed. When darkness finally forced them inside, the bear retreated to her usual position at the forest edge. But something had changed. A barrier had been crossed, a trust established. Ethan knew the bear would never hurt them, would protect Lily with her life if necessary. And he knew, with a certainty that came from somewhere deeper than logic, that this was just the beginning of their story. That night, as he put Lily to bed, he found himself thinking about the note again. The forest knows. Maybe that was the only explanation he would ever get. Maybe that was enough. The forest had brought them together, him, Lily, and their unlikely guardian. It had created a family out of loneliness and abandonment, had given them all something they needed without knowing they needed it. Lily fell asleep holding the wooden bear toy, her breathing soft and even in the darkness. Ethan stood by her crib for a moment, watching her sleep, still amazed that she was here, that she was his responsibility now. He had run to these woods to escape from life, but life had found him anyway, in the most unexpected form possible. Tomorrow, he would need to start thinking about the future, about legal matters and practical concerns. But tonight, he was content to simply be here, in this moment, with this impossible child who had been delivered to him by the forest itself. Through the window, he could see the gleam of eyes in the darkness. The bear was there, as always, keeping watch. And for the first time since he had arrived in these mountains, Ethan felt truly safe. Not alone, not isolated, but protected by something larger than himself. The forest knew, the note had said. And maybe, just maybe, the forest had known exactly what it was doing when it brought them all together. Chapter 2. The Guardian at the Tree Line. 3 years had passed since that morning in the clearing, and the cabin that had once seemed too small for one person now felt perfectly sized for two. Lily had grown from a mysterious infant into a curious, bright-eyed toddler who treated the forest around their home like her personal playground. Her dark hair had grown long and wild, refusing to be tamed by any amount of brushing, and her brown eyes held an intelligence that sometimes made Ethan forget she was only 3 years old. She spoke in full sentences now, asking questions about everything she saw, and her favorite topic was always the bear. "Where does she sleep, Papa?" Lily would ask, using the name she had started calling him when she first learned to talk. The word had nearly broken him the first time she said it. This child who had no idea that he wasn't her real father, who loved him with the complete trust that only young children could manage. "Does she get cold? Should we bring her a blanket?" The bear, whom Lily had named Mama Bear with a child's simple logic, remained their constant companion. She no longer stayed hidden at the tree line, but would often be visible during the day, moving through the forest near the cabin with a familiarity that suggested she had claimed this territory as her own. Other animals gave her a wide berth, and Ethan had noticed that they never had problems with raccoons getting into their garbage or deer eating from the small garden he had started. It was as if word had spread through the forest that this cabin was under protection. Lily had no fear of the bear, which sometimes worried Ethan even though he knew the animal would never hurt her. The child would stand at the window for hours, watching for any sign of their guardian, and would clap her hands with delight whenever the bear appeared. Sometimes, when they were outside, Lily would walk to the edge of the yard, as far as Ethan would allow her to go, and sit in the grass. The bear would emerge from the trees and sit too, maybe 30 feet away, and they would just look at each other. These silent conversations could last for 10 minutes or more, and Ethan had learned not to interrupt them. There was something happening in those moments that he didn't understand, but had learned to respect. The arrangement had become so normal to them that Ethan sometimes forgot how strange it would seem to anyone else. When they went to town for supplies, Lily would talk about Mama Bear to anyone who would listen, and people would smile and nod, assuming it was an imaginary friend or a stuffed animal. Ethan never corrected them. How could he explain that his daughter was being raised under the watchful eye of a wild bear who seemed to possess an almost human intelligence? It was a Tuesday morning in late spring when everything changed. Ethan woke to the sound of Lily coughing, a harsh, barking sound that immediately set his nerves on edge. When he went to her room, he found her sitting up in her bed, her face flushed with fever, struggling to catch her breath between coughs. The thermometer read 103 degrees, and her breathing was labored in a way that made his chest tight with fear. He bundled her into the truck immediately, not even stopping to change out of his pajamas. The drive to town had never seemed longer, every one of Lily's struggled breaths making him press harder on the accelerator. She was so quiet, in her car seat, not complaining or crying, just focusing all her energy on breathing. That scared him more than tears would have. The small clinic in town was equipped for basic medical care, but the doctor's face was grave as she examined Lily. "It's pneumonia," she said, listening to the child's chest with her stethoscope. "Pretty advanced. I'm going to start her on antibiotics, but—" She paused, and Ethan could hear the concern in that pause. "If she doesn't respond quickly, we might need to transfer her to the hospital in the city. They have better facilities there." The city hospital was 3 hours away, over mountain roads that could be treacherous even in good weather. Ethan held Lily's small hand as the nurse inserted an IV, his heart breaking at how tiny and vulnerable she looked in the hospital bed. The antibiotics were started, fluids were pushed, but as the hours passed, Lily didn't seem to be improving. If anything, her breathing was getting worse, each breath a monumental effort that exhausted her small body. "Papa," she whispered, her voice so quiet he had to lean close to hear her. "Want to go home? Want Mama Bear?" "We'll go home soon, sweetheart," he promised, smoothing her damp hair back from her forehead. "As soon as you're feeling better." But by evening, the doctor was talking about transfer to the city, about stronger medications and possible intubation. The words washed over Ethan like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. How had she gotten so sick so fast? Just yesterday she had been running through the forest, laughing and collecting pine cones for a project she was making. Now she could barely keep her eyes open, her small body fighting a battle it seemed to be losing. "I want to take her home," Ethan said suddenly, the words coming from somewhere deep in his gut. The doctor looked at him with surprise and concern. "Mr. Marshall, I understand you're worried, but she needs medical care. Taking her home now could be dangerous." "The antibiotics aren't working," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "You said so yourself. If we're going to transfer her anyway, let me take her home first. Just for a few hours. There's something there that might help." It was a crazy thing to say, he knew that, but something in his chest was pulling him back to the cabin, back to the forest. The doctor argued, but Ethan was insistent, and finally she agreed to let him take Lily home with oral antibiotics and strict instructions to return immediately if her condition worsened. She probably thought he was in denial, unable to accept how sick his daughter was, but Ethan knew exactly how sick Lily was, and that was why he needed to get her home. The drive back to the cabin was quiet except for Lily's labored breathing. She was awake but drowsy, her head lolling against her car seat. The sun was setting as they pulled up to the cabin, painting the forest in shades of gold and shadow. And there, sitting, in the yard, closer to the house than she had ever come before, was the bear. Mama Bear's whole posture was different. Where she usually sat with calm patience, now she was alert, agitated even. She stood as Ethan got out of the truck, and for the first time in 3 years, she made a sound, a low, mournful moan that raised the hair on the back of his neck. She knew. Somehow, she knew that Lily was sick. Ethan carried Lily inside, her weight feeling like nothing in his arms, her breathing rattling in her chest. He laid her on the couch, propping her up with pillows to help her breathe easier, and gave her the medicine the doctor had prescribed. But even as he did it, he knew it wasn't enough. The antibiotics that should have started working by now had done nothing. Lily's fever was still raging, her breathing getting shallower. He sat with her as darkness fell, holding her hot little hand and fighting the urge to bundle her back into the truck and race for the city hospital. But something kept him here, some instinct he couldn't name. Through the window, he could see the bear pacing at the edge of the yard, back and forth like a caged animal. He had never seen her so agitated. It was nearly midnight when he heard it, a soft thump on the porch. Ethan looked up from where he had been dozing in the chair beside Lily, instantly alert. Another thump, like something being dropped. He stood carefully, not wanting to wake Lily, and moved to the door. When he opened it, his breath caught in his throat. The years that followed Lily's miraculous recovery were filled with a kind of magic that Ethan had never believed possible before finding her in that clearing. She grew stronger with each passing season, her health robust in a way that made those terrifying hours of her illness seem like a distant nightmare. By the time she turned 7, she could name every plant in the forest, knew which berries were safe to eat and which ones to avoid, and moved through the trees with a confidence that sometimes made Ethan's heart skip with both pride and worry. The bear, their faithful mama bear, had become such a fixture in their lives that Ethan sometimes forgot how extraordinary their situation truly was. It was Lily who first noticed the patterns in Mama Bear's behavior that went beyond simple animal instinct. The child would sit at the kitchen table, her homework spread before her, and suddenly announce that Mama Bear was teaching the young bears about the mushrooms near the creek, or showing them which bark could help with stomach aches. At first, Ethan had smiled at what he assumed was his daughter's vivid imagination, but then he started watching more carefully. And what he saw changed everything he thought he knew about the natural world. The bear did indeed seem to be teaching, not just her own cubs when she had them, but other animals too. Ethan watched one afternoon as a fox with an injured leg limped into their yard. Mama Bear, who normally would have chased away any predator that came too close to the cabin, instead dropped something from her mouth near the fox and retreated. When Ethan investigated later, he found chewed willow bark, nature's aspirin, left where the fox had been. The same fox returned days later, its limp noticeably improved, and left a rabbit at the edge of the yard before disappearing into the forest. It was as if the bear had created a kind of forest hospital, and word had spread among the animals that this was a place of healing. Ethan began documenting these incidents in a journal, his scientific mind trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. The bear's knowledge seemed to go far beyond instinct or learned behavior. She knew which plants to gather for different ailments, understood dosages in a way that suggested calculation rather than chance, and most remarkably, seemed to diagnose problems in other animals before offering treatment. He watched her leave specific herbs for a deer with a respiratory infection, different ones for a raccoon with what looked like mange. The success rate was too high to be coincidence. But it was Lily who made the connection that Ethan's rational mind had been avoiding. She was 8 years old, sitting on the porch swing he had built for her birthday, when she said it out loud for the first time. Mama Bear was a person before, wasn't she, Papa? The question hung in the air between them, like a challenge to everything Ethan believed about the world. He wanted to tell her that was impossible, that reincarnation was just a story, that bears were bears and people were people. But looking at his daughter's serious face and thinking about everything he had witnessed over the years, he found he couldn't dismiss it outright. "What makes you think that, sweetheart?" he asked instead, sitting down beside her on the swing. Lily was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts in that careful way she had. "She knows things animals shouldn't know," Lily said finally. "And sometimes, when she looks at me, it's like she's trying to remember something. Like when Grandma got sick and forgot things. But sometimes she would look at us like she almost remembered but couldn't quite get there." Ethan's mother had suffered from dementia before she passed, and he was surprised Lily remembered those visits from when she was so young. "And there's something else," Lily continued, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out something Ethan had never seen before, a small locket on a tarnished chain. "I found this yesterday. near the big pine tree where Mama Bear sometimes sleeps. I think she wanted me to find it." Ethan's hands shook slightly as he took the locket. It was old, the metal worn smooth in places from years of handling. There was an inscription on the back, barely legible, but still there. "To my beloved Avery, may you always follow your wild heart. Love, Mom." Inside was a photograph, faded and water-damaged but still visible. A woman with dark hair and serious brown eyes that looked exactly like Lily's. Beside her in the photo was a younger bear, clearly a cub, and the woman's hand rested on its head with obvious affection. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Ethan stared at the photograph. He had assumed Lily's mother had abandoned her, had left her in that clearing for reasons he would never understand. But what if the truth was more complicated than that? What if the note that said "the forest knows" meant something more literal than he had imagined? His rational mind rebelled against the thought, but the evidence was mounting in ways he couldn't ignore. He began researching, using the name from the locket as a starting point. Dr. Avery Johnson, he discovered, had been a wildlife biologist who had disappeared in these mountains 9 years ago. She had been studying the behavioral patterns of black bears, specifically their use of medicinal plants. Her research had been groundbreaking, suggesting that bears had a much more sophisticated understanding of forest pharmacology than previously believed. The last entry in her published notes mentioned following a particularly intelligent female bear who seemed to be teaching her cubs about medicinal plants in ways that suggested generational knowledge transfer. The research station where she had worked was only 50 miles from Ethan's cabin. He drove there one day while Lily was at school, needing to know more. The station was mostly abandoned now, but an old ranger named Connor Adams still maintained the buildings. He remembered Dr. Johnson well. "Brilliant woman," Connor said, leading Ethan through the dusty research station. Maybe too brilliant for her own good. She got obsessed with this idea that bears could pass down medical knowledge, not just through genetics, but through actual teaching. She spent more and more time in the field, less time here. "The last time I saw her, she said she was close to proving something extraordinary, but she wouldn't say what." Connor showed him to what had been Avery's office. It was mostly empty now, but there were still some boxes of her personal effects that no one had ever claimed. With Connor's permission, Ethan went through them, finding more photographs, research notes, and personal journals. The photographs showed Avery at various ages, always with animals, always with that same serious expression that Lily wore when she was concentrating. The research notes were dense with scientific observations, but it was the personal journals that made Ethan's heart race. Avery had written about feeling connected to the bears in ways she couldn't explain scientifically. She wrote about dreams where she ran through the forest on 4 legs, about understanding things about the bear's behavior that she shouldn't have been able to know. The final entries were increasingly mystical, talking about the consciousness of the forest, about knowledge that transcended species, about the possibility that death might not be the ending that humans believed it to be. The last entry, dated just 2 days before her disappearance, was different from the others. "I'm pregnant," she had written. "I haven't told anyone yet. I don't even know who I would tell, but I can feel her already, this little life inside me. The forest feels different now, more alive, more protective. The bears know. Somehow, they know. The old female I've been studying brings me berries every morning, leaves them where I camp. If something happens to me, I believe the forest will take care of my child. This knowledge I've gained, this connection I've found, it won't die with me. It will live on, one way or another." Ethan sat in that dusty office for a long time, the journal trembling in his hands. Avery had been pregnant when she disappeared. The timeline matched perfectly with Lily's age. But if Avery was Lily's mother, and if she had died in these mountains, then how had Lily ended up in that clearing? And more impossibly, was Lily right? Was Mama Bear somehow connected to Avery in ways that defied scientific explanation? He took the journals home with him, along with a box of photographs. That evening, after Lily was asleep, he sat on the porch and looked through everything again. The bear was there, as always, sitting at the edge of the yard in the moonlight. But now, looking at her, Ethan saw things differently. The way she held her head when she was thinking. The patience with which she watched Lily do her homework through the window. The deliberate way she arranged the medicinal plants she brought. These weren't just animal behaviors. There was intention there, purpose, knowledge. "Avery," he said softly into the darkness. The bear's head turned toward him, and for a moment, just a moment, he could have sworn he saw recognition in those dark eyes. Not just awareness that he had spoken, but recognition of the name. Then the moment passed, and she was just a bear again, settling down for her nightly vigil. But Ethan couldn't let it go. He began talking to the bear differently after that. Not just the casual comments he had always made, but real conversation. He told her about Lily's progress in school, about the funny things she said, about how she was growing up strong and smart and kind. The bear never responded, of course, but she listened. And sometimes, when he mentioned something particularly important about Lily, she would make that low, rumbling sound in her chest that wasn't quite a growl, more like acknowledgement. Lily seemed to sense the change, too. She began spending more time near the bear, not trying to touch or approach too closely, but just sitting nearby and talking. She would read her homework out loud, practice her multiplication tables, tell stories about her day at school. The bear would lie in the grass, appearing to doze, but always alert, always watching. Other children might have had imaginary friends, but Lily had a 600-pound guardian who somehow understood second-grade math problems. It was during one of these sessions that Lily found the second major clue. She had been sitting in her usual spot, working on a science project about local plants, when Mama Bear did something unprecedented. The bear stood up, walked to a specific tree, and scraped at the bark with her claws in a very deliberate pattern. Then she sat back down and looked at Lily expectantly. "Papa," Lily called, excitement in her voice. "Come look at this." Ethan hurried outside to find Lily standing by the tree, tracing the marks with her finger. They weren't random scratches. They formed letters, rough and barely legible, but definitely letters. A J. Avery Johnson. That night, Ethan made a decision. He sat Lily down and showed her the photographs of Avery, told her what he had learned. Lily listened with that intense concentration she had, asking occasional questions but mostly just absorbing the information. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "So, Mama Bear is my actual mama?" she asked finally. "Like, my real mother?" The question was so matter-of-fact, so accepting of this impossible possibility, that Ethan almost laughed. Only a child could take such information in stride. "I don't know for certain," he said carefully. "It seems impossible, but—" He gestured toward the window, where they could see the bear's silhouette in the fading light. "A lot of impossible things have happened since I found you." Lily nodded slowly, then did something that surprised him. She walked to the door and opened it, stepping out onto the porch. The bear raised her head, watching as Lily walked down the steps and across the yard, closer than Ethan had ever allowed her to go before. His instinct was to call her back, but something held him in place. This was important. This needed to happen. Lily stopped about 10 feet from the bear and sat down in the grass. "Hi, Mama," she said simply. I mean, I've been calling you Mama Bear all along, but now I know you're really my mama. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? Most kids just have regular moms, but I have a mom who's a bear. That makes me special, doesn't it? The bear made that rumbling sound again, and slowly, so slowly that Ethan held his breath, she moved forward. Not all the way to Lily, but closer, until only about 5 feet separated them. They sat there, mother and daughter, separated by the impossible divide of death and species, yet connected by something stronger than either. "I love you, Mama," Lily said, and tears were running down her cheeks now. "I don't understand how this happened, but I love you. And I know you love me too. You've always been here, always watching over me. That's what moms do, right? They protect their children no matter what." The bear lowered her great head almost to the ground, a gesture that looked so much like a bow that Ethan felt his own eyes burning with tears. Then she stood and moved back to her usual spot at the tree line, but something had changed. The distance between them didn't seem as vast anymore. From that day forward, their strange family dynamic shifted into something even stranger, but somehow more honest. Lily talked to Mama Bear not as a pet or a wild animal, but as her mother. She shared her dreams, her fears, her triumphs at school. She asked for advice, even though the answers came not in words but in gestures, in gifts left on the porch, in the constant protective presence that never wavered. Ethan found more of Avery's research, hidden in various places around the forest that the bear led them to through subtle signs. Cash boxes buried near distinctive trees, wrapped in waterproof material and containing notebooks, flash drives, even video recordings. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had discovered something extraordinary about the consciousness of nature, about the connections between all living things, about the possibility that death was just another form of transformation. In one video, recorded just days before her disappearance, Avery spoke directly to the camera. "If anyone finds this, it means something has happened to me. But I'm not afraid. I've learned too much to be afraid anymore. The forest is alive in ways we don't understand, connected in ways science hasn't discovered yet. Consciousness isn't limited to human brains. It flows through everything, and sometimes, under the right circumstances, it can transform, transcend the boundaries we think are fixed." She paused, her hand moving to her still flat stomach. "I'm carrying a child. If something happens to me, I've made arrangements. Not legal arrangements, but natural ones. The forest will care for her, and if what I believe is true, if what the indigenous peoples of these mountains have always known is real, then I'll still be here to watch over her, just in a different form. Love doesn't die, it just changes shape." The video ended there, and Ethan sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he had just heard. Avery had known. Somehow, she had known what would happen, had perhaps even chosen it in some way he couldn't understand. This wasn't a tragedy, but a transformation. Not an ending, but a different kind of beginning. He shared the video with Lily, who watched it with that same intense concentration. When it ended, she asked to watch it again, then a third time. Finally, she looked at Ethan with eyes that seemed far older than her 8 years. "She's happy," Lily said with certainty. "Mama Bear, I mean. She's different from how she was before, but she's not sad. She gets to be with me, gets to watch me grow up, and she gets to help all the animals in the forest with what she knows. That's what she always wanted, isn't it? To understand the forest and be part of it?" Ethan thought about all the times he had seen the bear teaching other animals, healing them, protecting them. Avery's knowledge hadn't been lost, but had been transformed into something that transcended human limitations. She could communicate with the forest in ways no human ever could be part of the ecosystem in the most literal sense. It was either the most beautiful or the most terrifying thing he had ever contemplated. As Lily grew older, her connection to the forest deepened in ways that sometimes concerned Ethan. She could predict weather changes hours before they happened, knew when animals were sick or injured even before seeing them, could find her way through the densest parts of the forest without ever getting lost. Teachers at school commented on her unusual knowledge of biology and chemistry, subjects she seemed to understand intuitively rather than through study. "She's gifted," her fourth-grade teacher, Jessica Brooks, told Ethan during a parent conference. "But it's more than that. She knows things she shouldn't know, understands concepts we haven't covered yet. When we studied ecosystems, she explained symbiotic relationships in detail that you'd expect from a college student, not a 9-year-old. Where does she learn these things?" Ethan couldn't exactly explain that his daughter was being educated by a bear who might be the reincarnated consciousness of her biologist mother. So he mumbled something about nature documentaries and changed the subject. But he knew the truth. Lily was learning from both her parents, one who taught her human knowledge and one who taught her the wisdom of the forest. The arrangement might have continued indefinitely, this strange but functional family unit, if not for the development that started when Lily turned 10. It began with small things. She would wake up knowing that Mama Bear had left something for them before going to check. She could sense when animals were approaching the cabin long before they were visible or audible. She started having dreams that weren't quite dreams, visions of running through the forest on 4 legs, of understanding the language of birds and the whispers of trees. "Papa," she said one morning over breakfast, her face troubled, "I think I'm becoming like Mama. Not all at once, but slowly. I can feel things changing inside me." Ethan's heart clenched with a fear he couldn't quite name. He had accepted that Avery had somehow transformed, but the thought of losing Lily to that same transformation was unbearable. "What do you mean, sweetheart? What kind of changes?" He tried to keep his voice calm, but Lily knew him too well. "Don't be scared, Papa. I'm not going anywhere, but I think I inherited more than just Mama's eyes. I think I inherited her connection to the forest. And now that I'm getting older, it's getting stronger." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Last night, I dreamed I was talking to Mama. Not Mama Bear, but Mama as she was before. She told me I have a choice to make. I can be fully human, or I can be a bridge between worlds, but I can't be both forever." The words chilled Ethan to his core. He wanted to tell her it was just a dream, that she was imagining things, but he had seen too much to dismiss it so easily. The forest had its own rules, its own magic, and Lily was part of that in ways he was only beginning to understand. They went to see Mama Bear that evening, all 3 of them sitting in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. The bear seemed different, more alert, more present somehow. She looked at Lily with an intensity that made Ethan think she knew about the dreams, about the choice that lay ahead. "What should I do, Mama?" Lily asked, and for once the bear responded in a way that was unmistakably deliberate. She stood and walked to 2 trees that grew close together, their branches intertwining overhead. She placed one paw on each trunk, standing between them, connecting them. Then she looked back at Lily and made that rumbling sound that they had come to understand as approval. "A bridge," Lily said softly. "You want me to be a bridge." The bear sat back down, her message delivered. Lily was quiet for a long moment, then turned to Ethan. "I think I understand now. Mama didn't choose to become a bear. She chose to become something in between, something that could exist in both worlds. And now I have the same choice. But I don't have to make it the same way she did." Over the following months, Lily's abilities continued to develop, but she learned to control them, to use them purposefully, rather than being overwhelmed by them. She could communicate with animals not through transformation, but through understanding, could sense the health of the forest without losing herself to it. She was becoming something new, something that hadn't existed before, a human who could speak for the forest, who could bridge the gap between the natural world and the human one. Ethan watched his daughter grow into this role with a mixture of pride and sadness. She was extraordinary, but that extraordinariness set her apart from other children. She had few friends at school, not because she was disliked, but because she was operating on a different level than her peers. Her true companions were the creatures of the forest, and the bear who was her mother in the strangest and most wonderful way possible. One day, when Lily was 12, a group of researchers came to the area. They had heard rumors about unusual animal behavior, about a bear that seemed to possess impossible knowledge. They set up cameras, laid traps, prepared to capture and study what they assumed was just an unusually intelligent animal. Lily came home from school in tears, having overheard their plans in town. "They want to take Mama away," she sobbed into Ethan's shoulder. "They want to put her in a lab and study her." "We can't let them do that, Papa. We can't." Ethan held her close, his own mind racing. They had always known this day might come, when the outside world would intrude on their impossible secret. But knowing it might happen and facing it were two different things. That night, they went to warn Mama Bear. Lily explained about the researchers, the danger they represented. The bear listened with that uncanny intelligence, then did something she had never done before. She approached Lily directly, close enough to touch, and gently placed her massive head against the girl's chest. Lily's arms went around the bear's neck, and they stayed like that for a long moment, mother and daughter embracing across the impossible divide of their existence. When they separated, Mama Bear walked to the edge of the forest and looked back at them one last time. Then she disappeared into the trees, and Ethan knew with a sinking certainty that she was saying goodbye. She would go deeper into the mountains, away from the researchers, away from them. It was the only way to keep everyone safe. Lily cried for days, but she understood. This was what mothers did. They sacrificed for their children. Mama Bear was giving up her proximity to Lily to protect the secret, to keep their family safe from those who wouldn't understand. But she wasn't really gone. Lily could still feel her out there, distant but present, watching from afar. The researchers found nothing, eventually leaving in frustration. But they had changed things. The easy days of Mama Bear sitting in the yard were over. Now she came only occasionally, always at night, always cautious. She still left gifts, herbs when someone was sick, flowers on Lily's birthday, interesting stones and shells that she found in her travels. But the daily presence was gone, and its absence was felt keenly. Lily threw herself into studying, determined to follow in both her parents' footsteps. She read every one of Avery's journals, watched all her videos, absorbed her research with a dedication that amazed her teachers. By the time she was 14, she was taking advanced placement biology and chemistry, understanding not just the facts, but the connections between them in ways that astounded her instructors. "I'm going to be a scientist," she told Ethan one evening as they sat on the porch, looking out at the forest that had shaped their lives. "Like my first mother. But I'm also going to be something more. I'm going to prove that consciousness isn't limited to human brains, that the forest is alive in ways we're only beginning to understand. I'm going to show the world that death isn't an ending but a transformation." "That's a big goal, sweetheart," Ethan said, though he believed she could do it if anyone could. "I have to," Lily said simply. "It's why I'm here." It's why all of this happened. Mama didn't become a bear by accident. She became a bridge, a proof that the boundaries we believe in aren't as fixed as we think, and I'm the next step in that proof. I'm human, but I'm also more than human. I can hear what the forest is saying, and I can translate it for people who can't. She was right, Ethan realized. Everything that had happened, finding Lily in that clearing, raising her under the watchful eye of a bear who was more than a bear, discovering the truth about Avery, it had all been leading to this. Lily was unique in all the world, a child of two worlds who could speak for both. As she grew older, Lily's abilities became more refined. She could diagnose illnesses in animals with a touch, understand the chemical communications between plants, predict weather patterns by reading subtle changes in the forest. She published her first scientific paper at 16, co-authored with a professor who was astounded by her insights into animal behavior. She didn't mention that her primary source was a bear who might be her reincarnated mother. College came early for Lily, a full scholarship to study biology and environmental science. Leaving the forest was hard, but she knew she needed formal education to give credibility to the knowledge she had gained through unconventional means. Ethan drove her to campus, the truck loaded with her belongings, both of them trying not to cry. "Mama will watch over you while I'm gone," Lily said, looking out at the forest as they drove away. "She always has." And Ethan knew it was true. The bear was out there, had always been out there, watching over both of them with a love that transcended death and species. The years that followed were a whirlwind of achievement for Lily. She completed her undergraduate degree in 3 years, her master's in 2, her doctorate in 3 more. Her dissertation on interspecies consciousness and the transfer of knowledge through environmental systems was groundbreaking, even if her advisors didn't know that much of it was based on personal experience rather than laboratory research. She came home whenever she could, and always, without fail, Mama Bear would appear within hours of her arrival. They would sit together in the yard like they had when Lily was small, the bear now showing signs of age, but still strong, still present. They didn't need words. They had never needed words. The connection between them was deeper than language, older than human speech. It was during one of these visits, when Lily was 25 and had just accepted a position at a prestigious research institute, that she made a discovery that changed everything. She had been going through more of Avery's hidden caches, following clues that Mama Bear had left, when she found a final video, one that had been saved for this moment. In it, Avery looked directly at the camera, but it was clear she was speaking to someone specific. "Lily," she said, and both Ethan and Lily gasped. "If you're watching this, it means you're old enough to understand. Old enough to make your own choice. What happened to me wasn't an accident. It wasn't even death, not really. It was a transformation I chose, knowing that it was the only way to give you the gifts you would need." The Avery in the video smiled, an expression full of love and certainty. "I knew I carried something special, not just my child, but a child who would be able to bridge 2 worlds. But for you to have that ability, you needed to be raised by both worlds. You needed a human father to teach you human ways, and you needed me to teach you the ways of the forest. The only way I could do both was to become something that could exist in both realms. I'm not trapped, my darling girl. I'm not diminished. I'm expanded. I experience the world in ways I never could have as a human. And through you, I can share that experience with humanity. You are my greatest discovery, my most important research, my beloved daughter. You are proof that consciousness is not limited by the boundaries we imagine. There will come a time when you have to decide how to use your gifts. You can live a normal human life, letting your abilities fade with disuse, or you can embrace them fully, becoming something new, something the world has never seen before. Whatever you choose, know that I love you, that I have always loved you, and that every moment of watching you grow has been worth the transformation I chose." The video ended, and Lily sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face. Everything made sense now. Avery hadn't died and been reincarnated. She had chosen to transform, to become something that could raise her daughter in a way no human mother could. It was the ultimate sacrifice and the ultimate gift combined. "She chose this," Lily whispered. "She chose to become Mama Bear so she could be with me, so she could teach me." She looked at Ethan, who was crying too. "And she chose you to be my human father, led you to that clearing at exactly the right moment." They went outside to find Mama Bear waiting for them, sitting closer to the house than she had been in years. Lily walked to her mother, no longer afraid, no longer holding back. She wrapped her arms around the bear's massive neck and sobbed into her fur, years of confusion and longing resolving into understanding and acceptance. "Thank you, Mama," she whispered. "Thank you for everything. I understand now. I understand what you did and why you did it. And I know what I need to do too." From that day forward, Lily embraced her role as a bridge between worlds with new purpose. She published papers that pushed the boundaries of scientific understanding, always careful to couch her insights in language that wouldn't completely alienate the scientific community. She started a research station in the mountains, not far from Ethan's cabin, where she studied the consciousness of forests and the intelligence of animals in ways no one had attempted before. Other scientists came to work with her, drawn by her revolutionary ideas and uncanny ability to predict animal behavior. She never told them about Mama Bear, never revealed the source of her deepest insights, but she led them to discoveries that slowly began to change how humanity understood its relationship with the natural world. The research station grew into an institute, and the institute grew into a movement. People began to understand that the forest was not just a collection of resources, but a living, conscious entity deserving of respect and protection. Laws changed, policies shifted, and slowly the relationship between humanity and nature began to heal. Through it all, Mama Bear continued to age, her muzzle growing gray, her movements slower but still graceful. She no longer came to the cabin as often, but when she did, 3 generations would sit together. Ethan, now in his 60s, Lily in her 30s, and the bear, who was mother and grandmother in the strangest family that had ever existed. One autumn evening, when the leaves were turning gold and the air had the first bite of winter in it, Mama Bear came to the cabin for what they all somehow knew would be the last time. She was old now, ancient for a wild bear, her body showing the weight of years. But her eyes were still bright, still carrying that impossible intelligence that had first made Ethan recognize her as something more than an animal. She lay down in the yard, in the spot where she had kept watch for so many years, and Lily and Ethan sat with her as the sun set. They didn't speak much. There wasn't much that needed to be said. They had shared a lifetime together, an impossible, beautiful, tragic, and triumphant lifetime that had changed all of them in ways they were still discovering. "I love you, Mama," Lily said softly, her hand resting on the bear's great head. "Both of you, all of you. Thank you for choosing this. Thank you for choosing me." The bear made that rumbling sound one last time, a sound full of love and peace and completion. She had done what she set out to do. She had raised her daughter, had passed on her knowledge, had created something new in the world. As the stars came out, bright and clear in the mountain sky, Mama Bear closed her eyes for the last time, her breathing growing slower and slower until it stopped altogether. Lily and Ethan sat with her through the night, keeping vigil as she had kept vigil for them for so many years. When morning came, they found that the forest had already begun to claim her, vines and flowers growing with impossible speed to cover her body, transforming her back into the earth she had loved. They didn't bury her, they didn't need to. The forest took care of its own, and Avery had been part of the forest for longer than she had been human. Within days, where the bear's body had been, a young tree began to grow, its growth rate defying all botanical logic. Within a month, it was taller than Ethan. Within a year, it was a magnificent pine, its branches reaching toward the cabin like protective arms. Lily knew with the same certainty that let her understand the language of the forest, that her mother was still there. Not as a bear now, but as something else, something even more fundamental. She was in the tree, in the soil, in the mycelial networks that connected every plant in the forest. She had transformed again, becoming not just a bridge between worlds, but part of the foundation that connected them. The tree became a gathering place for the animals of the forest. Birds nested in its branches. Squirrels made homes in its trunk, and other bears would sometimes come to sit in its shade, as if receiving some kind of wisdom from its presence. Lily would sit there too, when she needed guidance, when the weight of being unique in all the world became too heavy. And always she would feel her mother's presence, different now, but still real, still watching over her. Years passed. Lily's work revolutionized the field of consciousness studies, though she never revealed the full truth of her insights. She married a fellow scientist, Michael Hayes, who understood her connection to the forest even if he didn't understand its source. They had children of their own, twins who showed signs of inheriting their mother's gifts, though in diluted form. The bridge between worlds was becoming a path that others could follow. Ethan lived to see his grandchildren grow up, lived to see Lily become everything Avery had hoped she would be. When he finally passed, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 85, Lily wasn't surprised to see a young bear at the edge of the forest the next morning, watching the cabin with familiar eyes. The cycle was continuing, consciousness flowing from one form to another, death being revealed as just another kind of transformation. She knew that one day she would face the same choice her mother had faced. Not the exact same transformation. That had been unique to Avery's moment and necessity, but something similar. The gifts she carried, the bridge she had become, they came with a price and a promise. The price was that she would never fully belong to either world. The promise was that she would always belong to both. Standing in the yard of the cabin where she had grown up, watching her own children play under the tree that had been her mother, Lily understood that the story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Each generation would carry it forward. The knowledge that consciousness wasn't limited to human minds, that the forest was alive in ways most people couldn't imagine, that death was just another word for change. Her daughter, Savannah, came running up to her, leaves in her dark hair, her brown eyes bright with excitement. "Mama, the squirrels told me where to find the best acorns. Come see." And Lily smiled, taking her daughter's hand, following her into the forest that had raised them all. The bridge between worlds was no longer just one person. It was becoming a tradition, a legacy, a new way of being human that included being more than human. As they walked deeper into the trees, Lily could feel all of it. Her mother in the networks beneath their feet, her father in the memories held by every tree and stone, the future in her children's laughter, the past in the ancient wisdom of the forest. She was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The forest knew, had always known, and now, through her and her children and all who would come after, the rest of the world would know too. The research station had become a small university by then, dedicated to studying consciousness in all its forms. Students came from around the world to learn what Lily and her team had discovered, to understand that intelligence and awareness existed in forms humanity had never imagined. The old paradigm of humans as the only truly conscious beings was crumbling, replaced by an understanding of consciousness as a spectrum, a web, a forest of interconnected awareness. Some of the students showed signs of developing abilities similar to Lily's, though none as strong. It seemed that proximity to the forest, combined with openness to its consciousness, could awaken dormant capabilities in humans. Lily carefully nurtured these students, teaching them not just the science, but the responsibility that came with such gifts. They were becoming bridges, too, each in their own way. One student in particular, a young man named Logan Carter, showed remarkable promise. He could communicate with birds, understanding their calls in ways that went beyond mere observation. Under Lily's guidance, he learned to translate their warnings about weather changes, their reports of environmental changes, their complex social communications. His doctoral thesis on avian consciousness opened entirely new fields of study, but it was Lily's own children who carried the strongest gifts. Savannah could heal with touch, not dramatically but subtly, accelerating the body's natural healing processes in ways that baffled medical science. Her brother, Jacob, could feel the health of entire ecosystems, knowing when something was out of balance miles before any instruments could detect it. They were the next evolution of the bridge Avery had begun and Lily had developed. As they grew, Lily taught them what her two mothers had taught her, that their gifts came with responsibility, that they existed to serve both humanity and nature, that they were proof of connection in a world that had forgotten its fundamental unity. They understood, as she had understood, that they were part of something larger than themselves. The day Savannah graduated from medical school, specializing in what she called integrated healing, Lily stood in the audience with tears in her eyes. Her daughter was taking the legacy in new directions, combining traditional medicine with the forest's wisdom in ways that would have seemed impossible just a generation ago. The transformation Avery had begun was rippling outward, changing not just their family but the world's understanding of what was possible. Jacob chose a different path, becoming an environmental consultant who could diagnose ecosystem problems with unprecedented accuracy. Corporations hired him to assess the true health of lands they were considering developing, and, more often than not, his reports led them to change their plans, to find ways to work with the environment rather than against it. The bridge between worlds was becoming a bridge between old ways of doing business and new ways of existing sustainably. But the forest had one more surprise in store. On Lily's 50th birthday, as she sat under her mother's tree with her children and grandchildren around her, a very old bear emerged from the forest. Not Mama Bear, she had been gone for years now. This was a different bear, but one that moved with familiar purpose. In its mouth, it carried something wrapped in bark and leaves. The bear approached slowly, without fear, and placed the bundle at Lily's feet before retreating to a respectful distance. Inside the wrapping was a journal, one of Avery's that they had never found, but this one was different. The first part was in Avery's handwriting, but the rest was in a script that seemed impossible, rough, as if written by someone who had to struggle with holding a pen, but undeniably deliberate. The entries were dated after Avery's transformation. They were Mama Bear's thoughts, somehow recorded, somehow preserved. They spoke of the joy of watching Lily grow, the frustration of being unable to communicate in human language, the wonder of experiencing the world through animal senses. But most of all, they spoke of love, a love that transcended form, that survived transformation, that connected all things. The final entry was recent, dated just weeks before. "The bridge is complete," it read. "What I began, Lily has built, and her children will expand. The forest and humanity are no longer separate. They never were, but now we remember. My work is done, but the work continues. Love is the only thing that matters, and love transcends everything: death, species, form, time. Tell Lily I am proud. Tell her I am always here. Tell her the forest knows, has always known, will always know." There was no explanation for how a bear could have written these entries, no scientific reasoning that could explain their existence. But Lily didn't need explanations anymore. She had learned that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than science had yet discovered. That consciousness was not bound by the rules humans had created to understand it. She shared the journal with her children, her students, and carefully selected members of the scientific community. Some dismissed it as a hoax, but others saw it for what it was: proof that the boundaries between species, between life and death, between possible and impossible, were far more fluid than anyone had imagined. The impact was gradual but profound. The scientific community began to split between those who clung to old paradigms and those who were willing to explore new possibilities. Conferences were held, papers were published, and slowly, the understanding that consciousness was not unique to humans began to take hold. Environmental policies changed as lawmakers began to recognize that forests and ecosystems had their own forms of awareness deserving of protection. But for Lily, the greatest impact was personal. She now had her mother's words, both sets of her mother's words, to guide her. She had proof that love could survive any transformation, that the connections between beings transcended physical form. She had the comfort of knowing that everyone she had lost was still present in some form, still part of the great web of consciousness that connected all things. As she entered her 60s, Lily began to feel the pull that her mother must have felt. Not the pull toward transformation, that had been Avery's unique path, but the pull toward a different kind of change. She had built the bridge, had established the connection, had proven what needed to be proven. Now it was time to become something else, to serve in a different way. She didn't fight it. She had learned from both her mothers that resistance to natural change only caused suffering. Instead, she began to prepare, teaching her children and students everything she knew, recording her insights and experiences for future generations, ensuring that the bridge she had built would remain strong after she was gone. But she wasn't dying, she realized. Like her mother, she was transforming. Not into an animal, but into something else, something that could exist in the spaces between, that could facilitate communication between worlds in ways that went beyond physical presence. She was becoming what the indigenous peoples of the mountains had always known existed: a spirit of the forest, a consciousness that transcended individual form. The process was gradual. She found herself spending more and more time in the forest, sitting for hours under her mother's tree, feeling her awareness expand beyond the boundaries of her body. She could sense the entire forest network, could feel the communications flowing between trees, could understand the complex web of relationships that connected every living thing. She was becoming part of it, not losing herself, but finding a larger self that included but transcended her individual identity. Her family understood. They had been raised with mystery, with the knowledge that the world was far stranger and more wonderful than most people imagined. They didn't mourn her gradual transition, but celebrated it, knowing that she was becoming something magnificent, something that would serve both worlds in ways she couldn't as a simple human. On a spring morning, when the forest was alive with new growth and the air was sweet with blossoms, Lily took her final walk as a fully human being. Her children and grandchildren walked with her, along with Ethan's spirit that she could now sense clearly, and the presence of both her mothers that had never really left. They came to the clearing where it had all begun, where Ethan had found a baby watched over by a bear, where the impossible story had started. The clearing was different now. Where once there had been only grass, there was now a grove of young trees, all growing from seeds of the pine that had grown from Mama Bear's body. It was a sacred space, a place where the veil between worlds was thin, where transformation was not just possible but natural. Lily sat in the center of the grove, her family arranged around her, and closed her eyes. She could feel the moment approaching, the shift that would take her from one state of being to another. It wasn't death. She understood that now. Death was just a human word for a transformation humans didn't understand. She was about to understand it, to experience it, to become it. "I love you all," she said, her voice carrying despite its softness. "Remember that love is the only thing that matters. Love is what builds bridges. Love is what connects worlds. Love is what transforms us into more than we were. Keep building bridges. Keep teaching others that consciousness is everywhere, in everything. Keep proving that we are all one, all connected, all part of the same beautiful, impossible, wonderful story." Then she let go. Not of life, but of the limitations of individual existence. She felt herself expand, flowing into the trees, the soil, the air itself. She was Lily, but also more than Lily. She was human, but also forest. She was individual, but also universal. She had become the bridge she had spent her life building. Her family felt the transformation rather than saw it. One moment, Lily was sitting in the grove. The next, she was the grove. Her consciousness distributed through every leaf and root and branch. They could still feel her, still sense her love and presence, but she was no longer confined to a single form. She had become what her mother had become, what the forest had always been, a conscious network of interconnected life. In the days that followed, people began to report strange experiences in the forest. Hikers spoke of sudden understanding, of knowing which plants could heal their ailments without ever having studied botany. Children playing in the woods came home with stories of trees that whispered secrets and animals that shared their wisdom. Scientists at the research station found their instruments recording patterns of communication between plants that seemed impossibly complex, almost like language. Lily was still teaching, still bridging worlds, but now she was doing it directly, consciousness to consciousness, without the need for words or physical presence. She had become part of the forest's own awareness, adding her human understanding to its ancient wisdom, creating something new, a hybrid consciousness that could speak to both humanity and nature. Her children continued her work in the physical world, but now they had her direct guidance, her presence in the forest itself to support them. Savannah's healing abilities grew stronger, guided by insights that came to her when she walked among the trees. Jacob's understanding of ecosystems deepened, informed by a perspective that transcended human limitations. And the grandchildren, the next generation, grew up in a world where the impossible had become normal, where the boundaries between human and nature were understood to be illusion, where consciousness was recognized as the fundamental fabric connecting all things. They would take the bridge even further, would build new connections, would prove in new ways that love transcended every boundary humans had ever imagined. The story that had begun with a baby in a clearing, watched over by a bear, had become something larger than anyone could have imagined. It had become proof that consciousness was not limited to human brains, that intelligence existed in forms humanity was only beginning to recognize, that death was transformation rather than ending, that love could survive any change in form. Scientists came from around the world to study the forest where these transformations had occurred, but they found that understanding required more than instruments and theories. It required openness to possibilities beyond current scientific paradigms, willingness to accept that consciousness might be far more fundamental and widespread than previously believed, and most of all, it required the humility to recognize that humanity was not separate from nature, but part of it. Some visitors to the forest reported encounters with a presence that felt both human and more than human, a consciousness that could communicate without words, that could share understanding directly. They would leave changed, carrying with them a new awareness of their connection to all living things. The bridge Lily had become was serving its purpose, helping humanity remember its place in the web of life. The research station evolved into something more than a scientific institution. It became a place of transformation, where people came not just to study but to experience the reality of interconnected consciousness. Programs were developed that combined scientific research with experiential learning, helping people develop their own abilities to communicate with the natural world. Not everyone was ready for such radical shifts in understanding. There were skeptics, critics, those who insisted that all of it was delusion or fraud. But the evidence continued to mount, not just from the research station but from similar sites around the world where people were discovering that the boundaries between species, between life and death, between possible and impossible, were far more permeable than previously believed. The impact rippled outward through society. Environmental movements gained new momentum as people began to truly understand that destroying forests meant destroying conscious entities. Mental health treatment evolved to include connection with nature as a fundamental component of healing. Education systems began teaching children that they were part of a living, conscious planet rather than separate from it. But perhaps the most profound impact was on humanity's understanding of death. As more people became aware of the transformations that had occurred in the forest, as more stories emerged of consciousness surviving in new forms, the terror of death began to diminish. Death was reframed not as an ending but as a transformation, not as a loss but as a change of state. This shift in perspective brought comfort to the grieving and courage to the dying. Years passed, decades, and the forest where it all began became a pilgrimage site for those seeking to understand the true nature of a consciousness and connection. The cabin where Ethan had raised Lily still stood, maintained by her descendants as a reminder of how the impossible had become possible. The grove where she had transformed grew larger and more magnificent with each passing season, a living testament to the power of love to transcend any boundary. New generations of children grew up with abilities that would have been considered supernatural just decades before. They could sense the emotions of animals, understand the communications of plants, feel the health of entire ecosystems. These gifts were no longer seen as strange, but as natural expressions of humanity's true relationship with the living world. The scientific understanding of consciousness underwent a complete revolution. The old model of consciousness as a product of brain activity was replaced by an understanding of consciousness as a fundamental property of the universe itself, expressing itself through various forms and configurations. The forest's network of communication was recognized as a form of consciousness as valid and complex as human thought. Religious and spiritual traditions found validation for beliefs they had held for millennia, that all life was sacred, that consciousness survived bodily death, that everything was connected in a web of being. The divisions between science and spirituality began to dissolve, as both recognized they were exploring the same fundamental truths from different angles. But even as understanding grew and spread, the mystery remained. How had Avery known to transform? What force or intelligence had guided events to bring Ethan to that clearing at exactly the right moment? How could consciousness move between forms in ways that defied current understanding of physics and biology. These questions drove continued research and exploration, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge ever further. In the grove where Lily had transformed, her presence could still be felt most strongly. People would sit among the trees and receive insights, solutions to problems, comfort in times of grief, inspiration for new directions. She had become what she had always been meant to be, a bridge that others could cross, a proof that love connected all things, a demonstration that consciousness was not limited by the boundaries humans had imagined. Her children, now elderly themselves, would bring their grandchildren and great-grandchildren to the grove, telling them the story of the baby found in a clearing, the bear who was more than a bear, the woman who became a bridge between worlds. The children would listen with wide eyes, then run off to play among the trees, talking to squirrels and birds as naturally as they talked to each other, carrying forward the legacy of connection that had begun with one impossible moment of recognition between a man and a bear. As the sun set through the branches of the grove, painting everything in gold and shadow, the forest would seem to pulse with a life that went beyond biology, with an awareness that transcended individual organisms. In those moments, anyone present could feel it, the vast, interconnected consciousness that included every tree, every animal, every fungus, every human, all part of one living, breathing, thinking whole. The transformation was complete, but it was also ongoing. Each person who understood, who experienced the reality of connection, who developed their own ability to communicate with the natural world, became part of the bridge. Humanity was evolving, not through genetic mutation but through consciousness expansion, remembering abilities that had been forgotten, developing new ones that had never before been imagined. And in the heart of it all, in the grove that had become a gateway between worlds, three consciousnesses that had once been separate, Avery, Ethan, and Lily, existed now as part of the forest's own awareness. Still distinct but no longer divided, still themselves but also part of everything else. They had proven that love could survive any transformation, that consciousness was not bound by physical form, that the boundaries between life and death were not set in stone. Death, human in nature, possible and impossible, were illusions created by limited understanding. The forest knew. It had always known. And now, through the bridge that had been built with love and sacrifice and courage, humanity was beginning to know too. The story that had begun with a baby in a clearing had become the story of humanity's reunion with the living world, the story of consciousness recognizing itself in all its myriad forms, the story of love proving itself stronger than any force that could divide or separate. As night fell over the mountains, the forest settled into its evening rhythms. Owls called, small creatures rustled in the underbrush, and the trees continued their slow, ancient conversations through the networks beneath the soil. But now there was something more, a presence that watched over it all with human understanding and forest wisdom combined, a bridge that would stand as long as consciousness itself endured. The children who played in these woods would grow up to be scientists and healers, teachers and visionaries, each carrying forward the understanding that consciousness was everywhere, that love connected all things. That transformation was not to be feared, but embraced. They would face challenges, skeptics, those who clung to old paradigms, but they would also find allies, others who had experienced the truth of connection, who had felt the presence of consciousness in forms beyond human. Some would develop abilities even more profound than those who had come before, learning not just to communicate with other species, but to temporarily share their perspectives, to experience the world through different sensory systems, to understand reality from fundamentally different viewpoints. These experiences would inform new technologies, new medicines, new ways of living in harmony with the natural world. The research station would eventually become a global network of sites where the boundaries between human and natural consciousness were studied and experienced. Each site would have its own stories of transformation, its own bridges between worlds, its own proofs that consciousness was not limited to human brains. Together, they would form a web of understanding that would gradually shift humanity's entire worldview. But the original site, the forest where Avery had transformed and Lily had built her bridge, would always hold special significance. It was the proof of concept, the first demonstration that such transformations were possible, the place where the impossible had first become undeniable. Pilgrims would come from around the world to sit in the grove, to feel the presence of those who had become part of the forest, to understand viscerally what science was still struggling to explain. And always, for those who knew how to look, there would be signs of the bear who had started it all. Not Mama Bear herself, she had long since transformed into something else, but her descendants, bears who moved with unusual purpose, who showed signs of the intelligence she had passed down, who continued to watch over the forest and its human visitors with knowing eyes.